Jews like to argue, right? This is as old as the Jewish people, so that's not, how are you? So that's not news. The Jews like to argue. What we will be discussing in the next 6 weeks are 6 of the most transformational debates that would have a long-term impact on the Jewish people. I'm not going to go through each one. If you've signed up for the class, you already know. If not, look through the book. You'll see Masada, etc. Very, very critical, important debates that would affect the Jewish people. I want to demonstrate what tonight's debate will be about. Okay? Everyone watching? It's not a magic trick. Watch carefully. Got it?
Got it.
That will be the topic of tonight's debate.
Water?
Mayim?
Not water, but before, lesson 1, the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls is a massive discussion discovered 70 years ago in November of 1947. Water going into a cup. Let's start with a video about the Dead Sea Scrolls.
November 25th, 1947.
The United States,
4 days before the UN would vote for the partition plan to grant Israel its statehood. Israeli-Arab tensions are spiraling madly, hurling the region to the brink of war. But in the old city of Jerusalem, 2 men stand beside the Jaffa Gate, separated by a barbed wire security fence, with something far more benign on their minds. Elazar Sukenik, a Jewish professor of archaeology at the Hebrew University, faces an Armenian antiquities dealer. Through the barrier's crevices, the dealer displays an ancient-looking fragment with Hebrew script. Sukenik is curious and excited. In his diary entry for that date, Sukenik records, "A Hebrew book has been discovered in a jar. He showed me a fragment written on parchment. Geniza?" Sukenik was the first Jew since ancient times to behold a fragment from a vast collection that had just begun to be unearthed in the Dead Sea region.
He actually was the first one to recognize the antiquity of the scrolls, and he knew the date the minute he looked at the script. He recognized it from some of the monuments around Jerusalem that had similar type of script. Now, he had no idea really that was going to open up a whole world to us in terms of not just the Dead Sea community, but a lot of things about Judaism in the period. I think it's fair to say that the Dead Sea Scrolls are the most important archaeological discovery of the 20th century.
About a year earlier, 3 Bedouin shepherds were tending their sheep and goats on the northwestern side of the Dead Sea. These shepherds would habitually explore desert caves. One of them flung a rock into a cave that was situated above the plateau where his animals were grazing. He heard the sound of something shattering within the cave.
We now know that this particular Bedouin family was specializing in hunting for antiquities. So these kids threw a stone into a cave. They heard something. They went in, and before they knew it, they had discovered the first 7 Dead Sea Scrolls.
The shepherds failed to comprehend the meaning or value of what they had found, but they removed the scrolls, which were then passed through several hands over the course of a year, until a scroll fragment was displayed to Sukenik by the Jaffa Gate. During the following decade, thousands of fragments believed to be from approximately 900 different scrolls came to light.
Now, these scrolls were mostly written in Hebrew. We generally say that about 80% were in Hebrew, about 20% were in Aramaic, and there are some very small fragments written in Greek. There's a date of composition, and of course that goes way, way back because the earliest scrolls are the Torah. But the sectarian documents were primarily written in the 2nd and 1st centuries before the Common Era. Now, if we talk about the date of copying, therefore, again, 2nd, 1st centuries, and a few in the 1st century CE.
The ancient parchments were discovered in 11 distinct caves in the vicinity of the ruins of an ancient settlement that locals refer to as Qumran. There is ample evidence to link the scrolls with the ancient settlement,
They, first of all, fit the same chronology in terms of what we know from archaeology and from the study of the scripts and carbon-14 dating. But then, as important, or maybe even more, we have what we call the pottery assemblages. Now, what's unique in these pottery assemblages is these big jars, which are really food storage jars, in which they put scrolls. These are found almost nowhere else, but they're found in large numbers in these caves and in these buildings.
In addition to the overwhelming use of Hebrew or Aramaic, many of the parchments are copies of sections of the Bible, the oldest copies known to be in existence. Clearly, they are Jewish scrolls, written and copied by Jews for Jews. But which ancient Jews authored or commissioned these scrolls? What were their beliefs and practices? And what was their relationship with the rest of the Jewish community of the ancient homeland? As we discover more about these fascinating artifacts of ancient Israel, we will find ourselves confronted by an intriguing and great debate among Jewry of antiquity. A debate that lay undisturbed for millennia among the arid rocks bordering the Dead Sea.
Okay, so there was, as you heard in the video, there were 11 different caves in one vicinity that were found to have scrolls inside. The cave that's the most important is the cave you see in this picture behind me, cave number 4. This was actually a library. It didn't just have scrolls that were wrapped up in protective jugs, like the ones that they found in the first cave when they threw in the rock and they found a scroll that was 9 meters long. That had been protected and had been put into a jug, really meant for food, to keep it protected. There was a cave that had thousands of fragments. I believe it had 900, they believe, not just in this one cave. In total, I believe they found 900 different documents, some of many pieces. The vast majority was in this cave, which if you look carefully actually has shelves put into the walls of the cave. This was used as a library, and probably many of the manuscripts were written here right on site. They weren't just collected from other places, they were written on site. And this was their library where they stored all their their texts, their documents, their belief system, etc. So, let us try and understand, well, 2 parts to tonight's class. First, trying to understand who are these people, where do they have their place in Jewish history, because they're obviously Jewish people. All their texts were in Hebrew. Well, 80% were in Hebrew, 20% are Aramaic. And then we'll get into what was the motivation for the debate, and why were they living separately from the rest of the Jewish people, etc. Okay? Yes?
What were the texts about?
Okay, so the texts were a wide variety of texts. A large number of them were actually copies of different biblical texts, copies of different books of Tanakh, Chumash, prophets, etc. And many of them were theological texts. We're going to read some of the texts. Many of them were texts on Jewish law. We're going to go through several of them tonight in class, discussing their theologies, discussing their debates with the rabbis on different areas of purity, etc. Some of them were calendar texts, they were calendars. Some of them were different laws, not so much laws in Jewish law, but different laws of their community. Their initiation rites, how you were allowed to enter into this community, etc. Okay? Mm-hmm. There's a handful, out of 900 documents, a handful that are not Jewish texts, that are Greek texts, etc. Very, very few. Not even 1%. Okay?
How would those get there?
Mingle, they came. Either someone had them there. There's a possibility the Romans were there afterwards. The destruction. It's you always have texts that somehow come from somewhere else, but they're not even 1%. 80% are Hebrew. The other 20% are Aramaic, with a few random things that somehow got mixed in. There's one very interesting text here, which is actually out of copper. It's not on parchment. It's hammered into a plate of copper, which is a treasure map, literally, like you see in the movie, like a pirate, where the person that wrote this claimed that they had hidden gold from the temple. There's been many, many archaeological digs and sites and research done based on this copper plate, that has so far yielded absolutely nada. Has not yielded anything. But this is a big debate if it's even authentic, if someone just made it, if it's because very likely the people that were in the dead, that were living in this community in Qumran, they did not have access to the money in the temple. They were not in control of the temple funds. So it's a big debate. This is one it's not even part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was found in this site, but it's a different kind of document. It's hammered out of copper. It's a interesting tidbit of information. We're not going to be discussing the treasures hidden in the desert right now. Okay, let's begin on page 2, text 1. Let's look at some quotes from the Dead Sea. Okay, from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Starting text 1. Who wants to start? Right in front of us. Susan, you want to start? Thank you to Barry for the water. Thank you, Lori, for doing the registration. Go, text 1a.
Woe to the city of blood. It is all lies and full of robbery. Its interpretation concerns the city of Ephraim, the seekers of falsehood at the end of days, who go by falsehoods and lies.
Okay, this is a commentary on a verse from the book of Nahum, one of the prophets. I should add that if you look in the Hebrew, and I should have said this before, you'll see some of the Hebrew letters are in hollow letters. Those are letters that are scholars have interpreted those letters, meaning some of the texts are missing letters. The actual parchment faded away, it doesn't exist, or it's pieces that were attached together to each other. So you can see a photocopy in the Hebrew text, and there's a picture of the photocopy. So you'll see where it's missing letters. So the letters that are missing, that are added based on extrapolation and based on study, those are added in hollow letters. The translation is meant to be simple to read, so it doesn't do that. Okay? Did you get a book? You have an extra book for Renee? Renee needs a book. Okay. Text 1b. We'll discuss these more in depth. Faith, you want to read text 1b?
Sure. Its interpretation concerns those who went astray, and whose teaching was their falsehood, and whose lying tongue and dishonest lips led many astray. For kings, officers, priests, people, and the assemblage become honors.
Okay, that's those from Nahum. Let's read a text from a different scroll. This scroll. Okay, text number 2. Jonathan, you want to read text number 2?
All these things the builders of the wall and those who daub it with plaster have not understood. For one who takes wind and preaches falsehoods preached to them, for which reason God became angry with his entire congregation. He hated the builders of the wall, he became angry with them and with all who followed them.
Okay, finally text number 3. Mindy, you want to read text number 3?
You know that we have separated from the mainstream of the people and from all their impurity and from being involved in these things and from participating with them regarding these matters.
Okay, so what do you see from all these fragments? I just showed you 4 selections from different texts, all theological texts of the people living in the Dead Sea, in the Qumran area. What kind of impression do you get from these fragments?
They weren't mainstream.
First of all, they're absolutely broke away from the mainstream. They're totally in a fight with the rest of the Jewish community. Which reminds, I said the Jews like to argue. Reminds me of one of the oldest Jewish jokes ever, of this guy that is stranded on a deserted island. And after many, many, many years, they somehow find him, and he's giving them a tour of the city he built for himself on the island. His windmill, and his power plant, and his bedroom, and his kitchen. He shows them, he built a whole building. This is his shul where he davens. Then they go to another building. What's this building? This is also a synagogue. What do you need 2 synagogues for? This is the synagogue I would never step foot into, right? So this community living in Qumran they have an issue. They've separated themselves from the mainstream, who they call the seekers of falsehood and the builders of walls. And we're going to discuss some of these titles later on in the class. You'll understand what some of these biblical kind of nicknames are meant to mean. Okay? That's number 1. Number 2, their opponents are not written explicitly. Nothing is written clearly in general. That was the style back then. Everything was written in nicknames and in biblical kind of titles and in hints. So they refer to their nickname, to their opponents, as Ephraim. Who is Ephraim? Ephraim is a euphemistic reference to the tribes of the north. When King Solomon's son had taken over the kingdom of Israel, there was a civil war. And the tribes of the north, led by Yeravam ben Nevat, who was from the tribe of Ephraim, broke away, the 10 northern tribes broke away from the kingdom of Yehuda, from the kingdom of Judah. Those would eventually be captured and sent into exile by the Assyrian government, never to be heard from again. 10 lost tribes, right? That's for another time. So Ephraim is a nickname of those that broke away from traditional Judaism and ended up being lost as a result. So the people living in the Dead Sea are referring to these other people that they're in a fight with as Ephraim, as those that are going away from Judaism and will one day be lost to Judaism as a result. Okay? Builders of the wall. What does builders of the wall mean? We'll soon see. We're going to get back to that builders of the wall. And we know where they live, because we have the archaeological evidence of them, in an area right on the northern part of the Dead Sea called Qumran. Okay? Now, this is who they are. They're a group of Jews, religious Jews. I'll say one more thing about the Dead Sea Scrolls. I meant to bring with me Lawrence Schiffman, his book on the Dead Sea Scrolls. He is by far the greatest expert today. He was in the video on the Dead Sea Scrolls. He has a very interesting book. I read the whole book. The scrolls were found in 1947. Until 1991, there were no Jews that were allowed to look at these scrolls and be part of the research on the scrolls. I mean, the exception that one guy, another Sekulnik, saw through a fence. Even after Israel took over in 1967, we took over the area where the Dead Sea Scrolls were, and now they're in Israeli territory, in Israeli hands. Israel adopted a policy of the status quo. Same thing they did on Temple Mount. They didn't want to disturb the status quo, so they left the research of the Dead Sea Scrolls as is. Until 1991, when they would reveal some of the texts, it's a whole long story, not for now. They would reveal some of the scrolls and they would find out that these people were very religious Jews. They were not Christians. Until then, the main storyline by the Christian researchers was that this group was the beginners, the founders of Christianity. That was the storyline from 1947 until 1991. And then it became public that these were very religious Jews. And many, many of their texts get into very detailed details of Jewish law. And when you understand some of these details of the Jewish law, then you can begin to understand who these people really are. So, remember, before that, what do you think, question, before I get back to my bottle of water, that's still waiting for me, l'chaim. What do you think is the most discussed topic in all of the Talmud? The most discussed topic in the entire Talmud?
Sins.
Sins.
Destruction of the
Tzaddik, righteous people.
destruction of the temple.
Destruction of the temple.
Laws.
Yeah, but more laws. Okay, the whole book is laws. Very good. More specifically, what kind of laws? What area of Jewish law do you think is the most discussed area of Jewish law?
Between
Civil law between man and another person. Kosher laws. So far, no one's gotten it.
Purity.
What? Shabbos, no.
Purity.
Damages is civil laws. The laws of ritual purity. Out of 60 volumes, 63 to be precise, volumes in the Talmud, 60 volumes of Mishnah, 12 of 60 are completely devoted to laws of ritual purity. That's 20% of the entire Talmud is about laws of ritual purity. Okay? Now, that sounds extreme to us, because we don't have a temple, and we don't bring sacrifices, and we don't eat truma, so to us, ritual purity is not relevant. But in the times of ancient biblical Israel, when the laws of ritual purity were very important, a Jew that was religious was as focused on ritual purity as a Jew today that's worried about kosher. And wherever you go, you worry about kosher, where you're traveling, where you're visiting, which is the store. Everything revolves around kosher food. That's how Jews in Israel were with the mikvah and with ritual purity. In fact, I saw something fascinating today. In Israel, they found 700, the archaeological find of 700 mikvahs that they've uncovered in Israel, 200 of which are just in Jerusalem. Now, I must interrupt myself and say that I am super, super excited been excited all day because I finally booked my tickets to Israel today on the Land and Spirit trip. As did whoever in this room is going with us, to Faith and Yonatan and Marsha and Carol. So we're going. You go to Israel, you see tons of mikvahs everywhere you go. Especially you go to the Temple Mount, you see literally, it's full of it. Mikvahs everywhere. Why? Because ritual purity was a very, very important area of Jewish law. We'll go back to Mishnah in a second. So let's talk about the laws of purity. Okay? So you have, it's very significant in temple times. Ritual purity, or ritual impurity, is transferred from one person to another, or from a person to an object, etc. There's many different levels of how it's transferred. But let's say you have a corpse, let's say you have a ritually impure body, and liquid comes in contact with this ritual, with this corpse, and now you pour that liquid into another cup, what happens? It gets transferred, right? And you need to go to the mikvah to get rid of that transfer of impurity. That all makes sense? Here's the question. You need to have, so let's say this bottle is impure, right? Let's say this bottle came in contact with someone impure. I pour it into this cup now. This cup is impure. That's clear, right? We got that. What would happen if this cup was ritually impure and this bottle is pure water? Okay? This cup was on the table, was whatever, was in contact with a dead body. This bottle is clean water, just open it. As I'm pouring the water, does the pouring of the water, oopsies, it's going to spoil soon, right? Does it make the top bottle impure or not? Let me, before you get confused, let's do this inside. Okay? Let me show you what I'm talking about. Here you have a cup. You can see it on the screen too. They didn't allow us to start pouring bottles of water. Here you have a cup. This cup has impure liquid in it. We got that?
Yes.
Now, the bottle is pure. Pure water is going in. The question is, this connection point right here is connected. I can't really show that with my pouring the cup because I'll still have a flood. But you see there's a connection? So does this connection may transfer the impurity from here into the pure water over here?
Yes.
You
it
could argue-
does.
But raise your hand. Who says it transfers?
Yes.
You say yes. Okay, who says no? Okay, perfect. You got a good debate going. Let's go. Go ahead.
I could argue either point.
What?
I could argue either point.
You can argue the point. You must be Jewish. Okay. So, now that you know, now, what?
I said, or a Sagittarian.
So, let's look at text number 4. This is a quote. Text number 4 is a quote from the Mishnah. Just so you know, the Mishnah, I'm going out of order here. The Mishnah was compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi in the year 200 CE, meaning 150 years after the destruction of the temple, also after the destruction of the people living in Qumran. These Dead Sea Scrolls were all composed from between 200 BCE till about the turn to the Common Era. The Jews that were living there were killed in the destruction of Israel by the Romans, probably in the year 63 CE, maybe in the year 70. They definitely did not live any time past there. When the Romans came through Israel and destroyed Jerusalem and all that, these people were absolutely killed as well. That's not a question. So you're talking about the Mishnah was written about 300 years after, between 400 and 200 years after the scrolls that were found by the Dead Sea Scrolls were written. Okay? Got that? In the Mishnah, written by Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, so there he writes the following text in the Mishnah that deals with ritual impurity on text number 4. David, you want to read text number 4?
Yes. The Sadducees say, "We complain to you, Pharisees, for you regard an uninterrupted flow of liquid as pure." Is that it?
That's it. What do the Sadducees say?
What are the Sadducees?
The Sadducees. Who are the Sadducees? Good question. The Sadducees were a group of Jews living in Israel at the same time that we're talking about, during the times of the temple, who had a major debate with the rabbis. And they felt that the rabbis were interpreting Torah in ways that it should not be interpreted. The Sadducees said that we only accept the written Torah. We only accept the Bible that God gave at Mount Sinai. Anything else, that's interpretation, that's not legit. It's not legit, we don't accept it. Okay?
The oral Torah.
The oral Torah. And we're going to discuss this soon in 2 minutes. Give you some cases first to get a feel. Sadducees say we do not accept any kind of oral tradition. And we'll discuss what different levels of oral tradition there are. We only accept the Bible. So, but they're religious Jews. They keep the laws of ritual purity, these people. So Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi writes in the Mishnah, written in the year 200 CE, that the Sadducees, who are no longer alive, they were destroyed before the destruction of the temple, they would complain to the other religious Jews, the rabbis, here described as the Pharisees, or in Hebrew the Prushim, from the word to pirush, to explain, the ones who would give pirush, the ones that would explain, and they say, we don't agree with you. We argue with you. Why? Because you consider an uninterrupted flow of liquid as pure. The rabbi said, this is the opinion of the rabbis, the Perushim, the Pharisees, that this water which is pure remains pure even though the water is touching a cup of impure fluid. Okay? So, if this cup is impure, it does not make this water pure. This water would still remain pure. That's the opinion of the rabbis. Okay? So says Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Now what's fascinating is, if you look at text number 5, which is a quote from this text called the Miktsas Maisa Halacha. This is a this is the text that was revealed in 1991, according to text number 5, that completely debunked any theory that the people living in the Dead Sea were the founders of Christianity. This is what made a tremendous political tumult. That we want transparency with the research. We want Jews to be involved in the research, and because in 40 years they still hadn't finished even cataloging all the scrolls that they had found. Here is a document, fascinating document, text number 5, found in Cave 4 that I showed you a picture of before in their library, that goes through a large number of debates that the Sadducees had, or this group living in the Qumran area had with their opponents. And read text number 5. Andrew, you want to read text number 5?
Sure. Also, concerning uninterrupted flows of liquid, we say that they are not pure, and that these flows do not separate between the impure and pure. For the liquid of uninterrupted flows and the liquid in the vessel are like a single liquid.
What do the Sadducees say? Here we see a text from inside the Dead Sea Scrolls, written a few hundred years before, in which they say, if there's a water that connects the flow of liquid, then the top water also by extension would also become ritually impure.
Mm-hmm.
You understand the case? You understand the debate?
Because it's one piece.
It's one piece. Now, by the way, I will just give you one exception. The rabbis would agree that if this was not water, but it was honey or something sticky, that they would also be connected. But when it comes to water, they say the water does not connect. The water above remains pure. The water below remains impure. Okay. Got it. Good. Ready for another debate? It's going to be almost as fascinating.
I understand though why they say that it's impure, because there's no guarantee that a droplet of water doesn't leave the glass and go up in, because when you pour, you always have a little bit of spray.
Spritz, yeah.
So that would be why, because there's no way to guarantee that didn't happen.
But they're also
By the
connected.
way, just so you know, in the laws of kosher, it's the exact same thing. If let's say you were pouring kosher chicken soup into non-kosher chicken soup, yeah? Even though it's a flow of liquid, whatever remains in the pot does not become non-kosher because the food that came out of it went into non-kosher food. That's the law. Okay, the point is not to really debate this thing. The point is just to give you an idea of the debate, the kind of text in these Dead Sea Scrolls, and soon we'll see why this is so important. Okay? Let's talk about the holiday of Shavuos. It's not as fun as Simchas Torah, that's true. Simchas Torah is more fun in my opinion. I'll take a l'chaim over cheesecake. It's healthier also, by the way. L'chaim is healthy. No sugar in l'chaim. Maybe the mixes my wife makes. I don't know, but
Oh yeah.
there's sugar. Okay, be not for sugar and everything. Let's talk about the laws of the calendar. Okay, the calendar. So, in the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, the Torah lists the dates and the laws of all the different holidays. And when the Torah lists the dates of the holidays, when is Pesach?
Nisan.
The 15th day of Nisan. That's black and white in the Bible. There's no discussion about that. Right? Where does it get complicated? What happens after Pesach? So in the Torah it says that on the day after Shabbat, in Hebrew, Mimacharat HaShabbat, on the morrow of Shabbat, you should bring a barley offering, an Omer offering. Okay? This is the Omer offering. They would go into the fields. They would actually harvest the field, fresh, just ripened produce. They would bring from that brand new harvest that had just been harvested on the day after Pesach, or on the day after Shabbat. We'll discuss what that means in a second. They would bring an offering called the Omer offering. And then what would happen? Who knows? We still do it till today.
Count.
We count 49 days, called the counting of the Omer for 49 days. And after 49 days, we got Shavuos, cheesecake, the giving of the Torah. Okay? The problem is, how do you define this morrow of Shabbat? The words in the Bible are on the day after Shabbat. So the rabbis interpret, what does the word Shabbat mean? What does the word Shabbat mean? Day of rest, correct. Shabbat means a day of rest. Pesach is also a day of rest. On Passover, you're not allowed to do any work. So when the Torah says on the day after Shabbat, what it means is the day after you rested from work, which is the day after Pesach. So therefore, the 15th of Nisan is the day of the Passover offering. The 16th of Nisan, the day after, you bring the Omer offering. 49 days later will be Shavuos. Okay? Which means that even if Pesach fell out on Friday, the day after is Shabbat, Friday night, they would go to the fields to cut the Omer, to harvest the new produce, to make the Omer offering on the Shabbat the day after. Okay?
So that's going against the laws of Shabbat.
Well, the laws of the temple override the laws of Shabbat. Whenever you have a positive commandment and a negative commandment, the positive command overweighs the negative. So when it says you should go harvest on the day after Pesach, and it says you should not harvest on Shabbat, the positive outweighs the negative. Just like giving a bris on the 8th day. You don't cut on the 8th day and you do a bris on Shabbat. And the positive outweighs the negative. Okay? So, this is what the rabbis interpret. The day after Shabbat means the day after Passover. What do the secretarians that are living in the Sadducees say?
Probably the next Shabbos.
Well, so let's read. Let's look in their calendar. Text number 6. Text number 6. Sorry. Text. Text number 5. Text number 6. Text number 6 describes how they will go out to the field to do this collecting of the Omer offering. Sandy, you want to read? No? It's other Sandy? You want to read? Text number 6, a description of the rabbis going out to the field to collect this Omer offering.
Residents from all cities that were near the location of the reaping would gather there so that the reaping would be carried out with great fanfare. Once night fell, the reaper would say to those who gathered, "Has the sun set?" And they would answer affirmatively. He would ask again, "Has the sun set?" And they would answer affirmatively. With this sickle, and they would answer affirmatively. With the sickle, they would answer affirmatively. The basket, they would answer affirmatively. This basket, they would answer affirmatively. If it were Friday night, he would say to them, "Is it Shabbat? Is it Shabbat?" And they would answer affirmatively. "Is it Shabbat?" They would answer affirmatively.
Go on. You're not off the hook yet.
"Shall I reap?" And they would answer reap. "Shall I reap?" They would answer reap. He would ask each question 3 times, and they would repeat affirmatively 3 times. What was the purpose of this ritual? Because of the
Baitusim.
Baitusim, who used to say that Omer was not reaped at the close of the festival.
Okay. So, the Torah, the Talmud describes a very complex ritual where they would go out with a tremendous fanfare. They would make a whole production out of this collection of the harvesting the produce, and they would ask If it's Friday night, is it Shabbat? And they say yes. Should I reap? Yes. Why? In order to show that they do not agree with a group called the Baitusim. Now the Baitusim and the Tzedaikim, or the Sadducees that we mentioned before, are one and the same. They're interchangeable names. They both have a very similar philosophy. In the Talmud, many times they use the two different names to describe the same group of people that fought against the rabbis. So this group of people, we'll call them the Sadducees to keep life simple. They disagree with the rabbis when you should reap the harvest, and therefore to show that we're not like them, therefore they would ask, is it Shabbat? Oh yes, it's Shabbat? Okay. Shall we reap? Yes. To make a point. Okay? That's clear? Where do the Sadducees stand on the calendar? Now, really, it's much more complicated than I'm going to tell you it is. Because really the Sadducees had a mixture of a lunar and a solar calendar. But let's keep it somewhat simple. And let's see what it says in the calendar that we found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's actually many calendar texts that were found. When you piece them together, if you look at text number 7, this is one of the calendars describing the dates. And we'll read what it says in the calendar. Before we read it, let me give you some help, because I know it's going to be a little confusing to read. Today, when you want to describe a week in Jewish law, how do you describe a week? You describe it by the name of the parsha you're going to read that week, right? So very often the books will say on the third day of the parsha of Vayera. Today is the third day of the parsha of Vayera, when God appeared to God. That's the name of the Torah, right? In the olden days, they didn't have the Torah reading in the synagogue. They didn't have synagogues. How would they describe the weeks? By the name of the family of priests in charge of serving in the temple that week. In the book of Chronicles, in Devrei Hayamim, it described the names of all the different priestly families that had turns in the temple. 24 mishmarot, 24 families that had turns. Okay? With that introduction, text number 7, Renee, you want to read? On the third day.
On the third day, in the week of the sons of Moaziah, falls the Passover. On the first day, in Jedaiah, falls the waving of the Omer. On the 5th day, in Seorim, falls the second Passover. On the first day in Jeshua falls the Festival of Weeks. Right,
so Vivian is asking what Hebrew is. It's very hard to have Hebrew there because a lot of the letters are missing, and it's that's the calendar. I mean, it's written down. When you can see a picture of the Hebrew if you want.
Yeah, I see it.
It's kind of hard to.
I wanted to see the Mosey and this and this. Okay.
It actually says something here. Okay. What do we see from that text? Renee, you read it so nicely. What is that text telling you about their understanding of the calendar? So let me explain. I'll help you out, okay? Let's hear before. Pesach, in that particular year that they kept this calendar, fell out on the third day of the week of the family called Moaziah. Moaziah, by the way, all these 4 names are all written in the book of Chronicles. They're all listed as families of the priests that had weeks in the temple. All 4 of the names are listed in the book of Chronicles. So, Tuesday, the third day of the week is what day? Tuesday, right? Like today. We start counting from Sunday, so Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Today's the third day of the week of Vayera. So on that year, Pesach fell out on the third day of the book of the week of the family of Moshe. What day did they bring the Omer offering? What does it say in the text?
The first day.
Click on the screen if you want. The first day of Jedaiah. Or I guess Jedaiah. So when is the Omer offering being brought? On
the Jedaiah family.
On Sunday.
On Sunday.
But
of the next week.
That's not when they reaped it, though.
I told you before, the rabbi said that you reap the harvest the very next day on the 16th day of the month, regardless of what day of the week it is, even if it's Shabbat. Or that's what we said 2 minutes ago. But here in the Dead Sea community, in the Qumran, they weren't bringing the Omer offering on Wednesday of the family of Mosiah. They were bringing the Omer offering on the next week, Sunday. And so then, when does the festival of Shavuos fall out?
30 days later, then
But it's
What does
really
it say?
It's not letting us know though.
It says clearly when Shavuos. And the festival of the weeks is the English translation of Shavuos.
Right.
Shavuos means festival of the
It's
weeks.
not telling us how many weeks.
Sunday of the family of. You don't know how many weeks. The point is on a Sunday.
Okay.
The Shavuos will always be, if it's 7 weeks, it's going to be the same day that you bring the Omer. So this year, I don't know when Pesach is this year. Last year Pesach was on Friday night, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes.
I believe it was on Friday night, which means that Shavuos will be on Saturday night, Sunday. Because the Omer was brought the next day. Saturday night, Sunday is the bringing of the Omer. And so Shavuos is going to be on Sunday. So, in that year that this calendar was written, Pesach fell out on Tuesday. So when were the traditional Jews bringing the Omer offering? Wednesday. So when did they start counting the 49 days of the Omer? Wednesday. So when was Shavuos? Wednesday. When are the people in the Dead Sea counting the 49 days? From Sunday. So their Shavuos falls out on a different week. Obviously 7 weeks later, on a Sunday. Why? Because they take the view of the Sadducees that when it says in the Bible you should start counting Omer on the day after Shabbat, that means literally on the day after Shabbat. That is a literal interpretation of the verse.
Which would make it a Sunday.
Which would make it a Sunday. They would celebrate Shavuos on Sunday every single year, no matter what day of the week Pesach fell out on. Let me review this. See Sunday? So here you have the difference between the Sadducees and the Perushim, all written in the Mishnah. We, the Perushim, the rabbis, would bring the Omer on the second day of Passover, and the Sadducees would always bring it on the day after Shabbat, which is Sunday. Which means that the Perushim, the Pharisees, would always celebrate Shavuos 49 days after whatever day was the second day of Passover. In that particular year, that this calendar would have been on Wednesday, and the Sadducees would always celebrate on Sunday.
So we follow the Perushim.
Yes. That's the law written in the Mishnah. The point is not that we follow the Perushim. The point is here you're seeing in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in their own calendar where they kept track of when they celebrated the holidays that year, that they clearly did not follow the mainstream opinion of the rabbis as recorded in the Mishnah. They follow the opinion as described in Jewish law, was the opinion of the Sadducees. Okay? So,
who are a significant minority.
Who is a significant minority?
Sadducees.
Yes. So let's go back to our question. So what do we know now about these people living in this community?
The Qumran were Sadducees.
Yes. Well. We cannot say for absolute certainty that they were Sadducees.
But they were not Pharisees.
We do know that their halachic opinions were that of the Sadducees. JLI did not want to make a blanket statement that's who they are because it is a matter of debate. There are people who claim that they were the Essenes or Essenes. Lawrence Schiffman, again, who is the top author, like I read, if you read his book, he takes the strong position that they're not the Essenes. The Essenes are actually not mentioned anywhere in Jewish law. There is no mention of them in the Mishnah. They exist only in the writings of Josephus. Not to say he's not a reliable source, but it's very possible he took some fringe element that he thought would be interesting. When you're a reporter, you write the interesting stuff. You don't necessarily write it in context. Right. So you found a sensationalist group that didn't marry women, that didn't have kids, that was like, some aesthetic cult. He wrote about them. But as far as the Jewish record of history goes, these people that Josephus writes about, called the Essenes, don't exist in Jewish literature. There is no reference to them anywhere in the Talmud or in the Mishnah, etc. However, the Sadducees have many, many, many mentions. They are described in detail as the group of Jews that fought against the mainstream rabbinic interpretations. There are records of high priests that were Sadducees. Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon, the righteous high priest, that was 80 years old. At the age of 80, he became a Sadducee. When we were in the Sukkah a few weeks ago, we had a class. We discussed the pouring of the water on Sukkahs. How someone poured it. There was a Sadducee who poured it on his feet, and they stoned him to death with estrogs. This was a group they fought. It's a group that fought against the Jews. Okay? I feel comfortable saying that they were the Sadducees based on reading Lawrence Schiffman's book, but absolutely unquestionable, for sure weren't Christians. They were very religious Jews who fought very, very strongly about these small matters of Jewish law. Okay? That was their whole debate. The whole primary cause of anger was How dare you allow the water that's in the top bucket, in the top bottle, to remain ritually pure when it's touching impure? How dare you celebrate Shavuos on Tuesday or on Wednesday when we believe it should be on Sunday? There's one more amazing thing.
They took things very literally.
Very literally. Before we get to their debate, I want to make one more very important point. There are people that think the Mishnah was invented by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi 200 years after the destruction of the temple. What the Dead Sea Scrolls do, by the way, parenthetically, is they give us archaeological proof going back 300 to 400 years before the Mishnah is written, proving that everything the Mishnah writes about what happened in the temple is true from a completely different sect of Judaism that did not agree with the rabbis. But you see a very, very powerful, historically accurate validation of the Mishnah. So many people think the Mishnah was made up by the rabbis. A few hundred years later, they invented a new form of religion. They made up Judaism. They decided what it was. The Mishnah was written 200 years after the destruction, 150 years. It was compiled. You know, it's compilation of teachings from before, of rabbis' traditions passed down. But here you see from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we only took 2 examples, and then if you look in the appendix, there's more examples regarding the burning of the red heifer offering, the paraduma, and there's many more. I mean, there's many of them. Where you see clearly that the Mishnaic interpretation, or Mishnaic tradition, the description, I should say, that's a better word, of what happened in the times of the temple, the debates of Jewish law that are presented from the rabbi's side, that exact same debate is presented from proof we have now, 300 years earlier, in the exact same debate from the exact opposite side of the coin. You don't get more accurate validation from an archaeological and historical perspective than that. So that's a very, very cool thing that is really proven by people that were not agreeing with the rabbis of the Mishnah at all. But it validates very much what the Mishnah says from a historical accuracy perspective. Okay? So
That may be even more valid, because it's historically accurate.
yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls,
Yeah.
and it's not like it's we have a tradition, so the Mishnah says, and this is the later version of the
This is
Mishnah. This is the
actual.
original source, the original texts that were written then,
Yeah.
untouched for 2,000 years, that literally say the exact same thing as the Mishnah, but written 300 years before, and by the opposite side of the debate.
Fascinating.
Okay. So, what I just said to you is written in text number 8. Tom, you want to read text number 8? Josh? Text number 8.
Qumran evidence reveals that, contrary to widespread scholarly opinion, Synodical literature preserves reliable information about the pre-70 CE Pharisees. These Pharisees are, as they are illustrated by the Qumran material, are truly similar to what is described in the later rabbinic texts, especially as regards the specifics of their legal rulings. One thing is certain, the rabbinic system was not invented de novo after the destruction of the temple and the nation in the Great Revolt against Rome in 66 to 73 CE. It was a continuation, albeit with numerous changes and innovations, that based itself on the long tradition of Pharisaic Judaism, revealed more fully than ever before in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Okay. That's a very important, very beautiful point that shows the validity of the entire tradition and authority and authenticity of the Talmud and the Mishnah. Okay? So now that we kind of have an idea of who these people living in the Qumran were, who the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls are, now let's try to understand, why are they fighting?
Why not?
Why not? That's a good Jewish way of answering the question with a question. But again, we only discussed 2 of many debates that are recorded both in the Mishnah and in the Dead Sea Scroll. This document called the Miktzat Maaseh Halacha, this document that records a whole list, I don't know how many are in there, I think 30 different things that are in this document that they found rolled up in the cave, cave 4, that 30 different cases, or 32 different cases, where they write where we disagree in rulings with the rabbis. We just took 2 of them. Well, actually, one of them from here, one from the calendar, not even from that document. But some of them are very minor things. Is the water pure or impure? You can debate it. In the Talmud, you have many debates between Shammai and Hillel and Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Gamaliel. Many debates. Is this pure or impure? Shammai says it's impure and Hillel says pure. What was so amazing about these debates? The debate about in the appendix about the burning of the ashes. But if the guy went to the mikveh earlier in the day, we're not going to read it inside. We don't have time. He went to the mikveh early in the day. It wasn't yet nightfall. Is he considered ritually pure if the sun didn't set yet? Okay, so it's a debate. To break away from the Jewish community, to go live in isolation, to separate yourself from the entire community, and you see some of the texts where they write about the people that are destroying Judaism. Why do they have such a strong clash between the mainstream rabbis and this sect called the Sadducees, or the Baitusim, etc.? So in order to understand this, you need to understand how oral Torah works. Now, to describe how oral Torah works is not something you can do in a few minutes of one class. And in fact, for those who are at the Judaism Decoded course, which we taught from JLI a few years ago, and it's online on YouTube, we went through it in very, very well done detail. I'm going to try and give you in 5 minutes a complete overview of the entire structure of oral Jewish law. Okay? I'm not going to read the text inside, I'm going to give it to you outside and try and explain it as best as we can. And once you understand this structure, then you'll be able to understand where the Sadducees disagree in structure with the rabbis and why they felt that this debate is critical to the future of Judaism. Why both sides felt that it's critical to the future of Judaism, and then we'll see what prevailed. Okay? The first area of what we have the Bible. That's the written law. That's indisputable. God gave the Jews the Torah at Mount Sinai. There is nothing to debate, nothing to discuss. This is the Word of God. Right? Okay. Then you have the received oral traditions. If you were to look at text number 9 from Josephus, or at text number 10 from the Rambam from Maimonides, you'll see the same idea. Which is that basically the Jews have a tradition that when God told Moshe, write down, you shall do, bind them as a sign upon your arm, as a remembrance between your eyes. At the same time that God said those words to be written to Moshe, God orally taught Moshe what the tefillin should be made out of. What parchment should be put inside, how many parchment, where it should be placed. And in fact, by the way, this is very interesting, in Qumran they found over 30 pairs of tefillin. And all the tefillin had 4 compartments, like our tefillin. And in the tefillin, like today, I put on 2 pairs of tefillin every single day, Rashi and Rabbi Tam. Because the difference in the order, how you put them in. They found both different opinions in the tefillin in Qumran. They found both Rashi and Rabbi Tam. They found tefillin, they found mezuzah scrolls there, they found tefillin there. So how do you know there's 4 compartments in the tefillin? It doesn't say anywhere in the Bible, you shall put 4 parchments on your arms. Just says you should put a sign on your arms. But there's an oral tradition that was received by Moses from God on Mount Sinai that said, these are the 4 paragraphs you should put into the tefillin. Now it could be that they added to the paragraphs. Those 4 paragraphs are there. I think that they, if I'm not mistaken, there's extra verses as well. But the concept is a received tradition straight from Moshe at Mount Sinai. Okay? That's called received oral law. When the Torah said, you should take an esrog, the Torah didn't say the word esrog. It said a beautiful fruit. But every single Jew in the world accepts that the beautiful fruit described in the Torah is an esrog. Because that was a tradition that Moshe received directly from the mouth of God on Mount Sinai. Wasn't written down, but straight from Mount Sinai. In Hebrew, that's called Kabbalah Moshe Sinai, or Halacha Moshe Sinai. In English, we call it the received oral law. Okay? The second category of law is called derived. Derived in Hebrew is the Yud Gimel Midas Sha'atayra Nidreshes Behem, the principle by which the Torah is derived. Which means the rabbis are sitting in the study hall and they're trying to figure out, does the impurity go from the top to the bottom? As they start learning the verses describing ritual purity, and they start to extrapolate from the verse, like this, like that, etc., until they come to some conclusion. And in the Talmudic yeshiva, There may debate. How do you interpret it? Do you read it this way or do you read it that way? Right? That's Jewish tradition. I haven't said a single joke, I said it at the beginning. But the famous joke, I've said it before, of this rabbi, this new young rabbi comes to an old established shul, and comes the first Shabbos that he's there, and comes to the Shema, and some people are standing, and they're telling people who are sitting to stand up, and some people are sitting saying you should sit down. It's a whole debate. Every Shabbos comes to the reading of the Shema, and the different people, the guys that are standing are screaming, those that are sitting are screaming, those that are standing, they're all fighting with each other. So finally the rabbi says, I have to figure out, what was the tradition, what was the custom in this shul? What was the old, when they first started the shul? Would they sit for the Shema, would they stand for the Shema? So he's trying to find out, no one remembers. So how are we going to fight it? So finally he found who was one of the founding members, a guy called Abe. Abe was 93 years old, he's living in an old age home, but he's still senile, still knows what's going on. He's the only remaining living founding member of the temple. So it's agreed that there's going to be a whole delegation from the temple. They're going to go, the rabbi, and some of those that scream really loud that you got to stand during the Shema, and those that scream you got to sit during the Shema, and they're all going to go to the old age home to ask Abe what to do. They all come, and Abe was sitting there with his, by his room, and the rabbi comes. This is Abe. We got to ask you an important question. Tell me, do you remember in the synagogue when they would say the Shema? Do you remember if they would say the Shema sitting down? And he says, I don't think they were sitting down. So the guys were standing, say, oh, you see, they were standing. And Abe says, I don't think that they were standing either. So the says, so what was it? Now in shul, it's crazy. They all scream and shout at each other. Says, that's what they were doing in shul. That's the tradition. They got to fight. They had to argue from the first week they found in the synagogue. They're already fighting. So these areas of derived law, you have many, many debates. Many rabbis say, I learned the verse to interpret this. And the other, within a structure, within a framework of the principles of derivation that God gave us. And we're not going to get into the details of what they are now. Again, there's a whole class on how derived oral law works, how the debates of the Talmud work. But within this structure of Jewish law, one rabbi interprets the verse this way, another rabbi interprets a different verse. He says, I have a source from here. He says, I have a source from here. So I prove this, you prove that. I say that your verse is referring to something else, and I say that your verse is referring to something else, and we live happily ever after. That's the Talmud. That's what we call derived oral law. Okay? And again, if you look at text number 11, text number 12, Josephus describes, if you just look at text number 11, the Pharisees. Let's do text number 11. Vivi, you want to read text number 11?
The Pharisees are those who are considered most skillful in the exact explication of their laws and are the leading school.
So here, the historian Josephus said that the Pharisees, their expertise is their ability to exact different meanings and messages and lessons for us from the verses, from the structure of the Torah, and this way of learning Jewish law is the leading school in Israel. They are the primary group of Jews that follow these interpretations and derivations of the Torah. And again, text number.
They were also the majority.
That's the leading school. They're the majority, which they were. They were the majority of Jewish thought in Israel at the time of Josephus, which is 470 CE. Again, that's text number 12, the idea of how to expound the laws of the Torah. The third category of oral Torah is what we call legislation. The legislated laws, or in Hebrew called the fence of the Torah, the siyag la Torah. In Ethics of Our Fathers, the very first Mishnah, in Ethics of Our Fathers, is a statement where it goes through the tradition of the Torah from Moses to Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the sage of the assembly, the men of the great assembly, the Sanhedrin. And then it says three things they would always say. What were the three things? The third thing, make a fence around the Torah. Which means that the rabbis were living in the time after the destruction of the temple. There was a spiritual weakening of the Jewish people. So the rabbis got together and said, we're going to legislate a law. It's not in the Bible, but for example, even though the Bible only forbids you to eat meat and milk together, because we see people becoming lax in the keeping of these laws, people are getting insensitive to the importance of not mixing meat and milk, we're going to make sure that even chicken, which is similar to meat, also shouldn't be mixed with milk, to prevent someone seeing a religious Jew eating chicken and milk and thinking that you're allowed to eat meat and milk together because they're not educated in one of the law. That's just one example. There's also Muktzah on Shabbos, many such examples. What? Many examples. No shortage of examples of laws that were legislated by the rabbis, not based upon a derivation, a verse, trying to understand the law from the Torah, not based on the tradition from Moses at Mount Sinai, but based on their understanding of what would be the best for the needs of the Jewish community at that time. Okay? Side point, in any kind of country you have it too. In America you also have that. You have the written constitution, then you have the tradition, the understanding of what that means, passed down together with the tradition, with the written constitution. You have a Second Amendment. Doesn't mean that you can own the nuclear weapons. So you have a right to bear arms, but obviously, how do we interpret? What does that mean? Then you have the derived oral. What?
It's limited, yeah.
It's limited. It's limited. As it was written with a limitation that are not written down in the text. You have the derived. So the Supreme Court for the trying to derive is it constitutional for the government to listen to all keep track of all data coming out of cell phone towers. The government's keeping every single cell phone number every number that your cell phone ever dialed or received a call from. So that's what you have the justices for. You have courts, and they derive based on our understanding of the Constitution. Is it constitutional or not? And then you have a legislator, and the legislation, the Congress, the Senate, assuming that it was a working body of people, then they make laws. What would be good for our country? Again, it's theoretically, in the way the country was. In the way the country was meant to...
There's a lot to say about it.
Yeah, I'm not going there. Just saying, conceptually, they have the same concept. That you have a legislator that makes laws that are not based on the Constitution. Constitution was written, there was no immigration, for example, but now we have a serious issue. So they say they make laws, how to deal with immigration, etc. Right? Okay. This is how oral Torah works. Come along the Sadducees, or the people living in the Dead Sea, and they reject this entire framework. They say, you're only human beings, you have no right to interpret Torah. Torah is what God says, and that's it. Judaism is from God. God said it, I accept it. You say it, I don't accept. You have no right to add to the Torah. Okay? If you understand that, then many of the phrases that we mentioned earlier in the class when we started reading some of these fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls describing their opponents make sense. What was the first thing we said? That we called the Dead Sea Scrolls describe the others, their opponents, as the Dorshei HaChalakos. What does Dorshei HaChalakos mean? Was that before? Chalak means smooth.
Yeah.
So we translate it as seekers of falsehood. It's based on the verse. But many scholars believe that they're actually saying something else. It's a pun.
Taking the easy way out?
Not easy way out, trying to make things easy. Let's see, text number 14. Sorry, you want to read text number?
No, I haven't been.
No. Lori, you want to read text number 14?
Sure. It is important to examine the designation our text uses for the Pharisees. The Hebrew expression, Dorshei HaChalakot, is actually a pun. It begins with halakot, literally smooth things, falsehoods, which appears in Isaiah 30:10, Psalms 12:3-4, and 73:18, and Daniel 11:32. This word is intended here as a play on the word halachot, a term attested otherwise only later, which refers to the Pharisaic rabbinic laws. While the noun halachot appears in Isaiah with dabru, to speak, it appears here as well as in other sectarian documents with darash, which by this time meant to interpret. Accordingly, the expression Dorshei HaChalakot is a designation for the Pharisees who, in the view of the sect, are false interpreters of the Torah, who derive incorrect legal rulings from their
exegesis.
Okay, as she said.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Yes.
I'm usually good with words.
That's a mouthful, that
If
word.
the Sadducees had prevailed, then Judaism would never survive the destruction of the temple, because the Torah would have been frozen and would never have been able to...
Absolutely. You're jumping ahead by 10 minutes, but absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
You'll have to wait 10 minutes.
You have to wait 10 minutes. Or else I'm going to be frozen. Yes, absolutely. Yes, 100%. Exactly correct. Okay, we're not going to too much into the exact wording, but it's important that you have the proof. It should be clear from the text of the Dead Sea Scrolls who they're talking about. These people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, most likely the Sadducees, if not exactly them, then a subsect of them that perhaps a yeshiva of Sadducees, etc., where they were training their men, felt that the rabbis are interpreters of falsehood. They're making things smooth. They're trying to make ways that the Torah should fit to the modern day times by smoothing things out by their interpretations that are really falsehoods. They feel that Judaism is being destroyed by rabbis that are coming along and making up interpretations. So to be quoted from another text, this is actually, I believe that the word Talmud Shikra is from the Geniza in Cairo. There was a Cairo Geniza that one of the ways of corroborating the Dead Sea Scrolls was that before, I believe in 1911, they had found in the Geniza, which is where they were buried, holy papers that couldn't be thrown out, that have to be buried, so they were stored for burial, documents from the same era of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It wasn't Dead Sea Scrolls yet, it was before, but same style handwriting, same language, the same kind of textual grammar, same era, same authors. And there they describe them as Talmud Shikra. What does Talmud Shikra mean?
Falsehoods.
So in the scroll 2, in text 2 that we mentioned, if you want to look back, we mentioned they lead many astray, their kings, their officers, the priests, etc. Proselyte who converts, sorry, not text 3. Right, they had, meaning, who are they talking about here? A group of rabbis that have a large following. They're in control of the king, they're in control of the high priests, they're in control of the converts, of the basin, of the courts. They're in charge, but, which by the way fits with what Josephus said. What did Josephus call the Pharisees? The leading school of thought. Right? We saw Josephus said they were the ones in charge. They were the mainstream Judaism, if you will. And where the other group is saying, B'Talmud Shikram, which means, what does B'Talmud Shikram mean? Their Talmud, their analytical analysis, their Talmudic discussions, are Shikram, are Sheker, are false.
Yeah.
So again, you're seeing clearly that these people that are living in the Dead Sea, in the Qumran, who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, are fundamentally opposed to the rabbis, not because they disagree over a halacha if the water in the bottle is pure or impure. What are they arguing about? The whole concept of people coming with analytical analysis and deciding laws of purity based upon their own understanding, based on their own interpretations. One more example, the Bonei HaChayitz, they're described in scroll 3, in text 4. In text 4, we describe them as the builders of the wall. Remember that?
That God hated.
Fence around the Torah.
Exactly. Who are the builders of the wall? The builders of the wall. Oh, we mentioned before the fence around the Torah. We mentioned before that the rabbis felt a fundamental need to build a protective fence. Chicken shouldn't be eaten with milk to protect the integrity of the laws.
Yeah.
I always give the example of I say this beautiful story. This woman comes to Tajdeika's shop to buy a siddur, buy a prayer book. An old woman, she wants to buy a prayer book. What kind of prayer book? She says, I want with a lot of commentaries. You ever saw like a Talmud? You have the old prayer book, you have the Talmud in the middle, right? You have commentaries all around the page. So she wants a prayer book the same way, with text in the middle and all the commentaries. So the salesman is trying to be talking. She says, who are you buying this for your husband? She says, no, my husband died years ago. She's buying it for your son, for your son-in-law. She says, no, I have no kids, no son-in-laws, no scholars in the family. I'm buying it for myself. So the salesman's looking at this lady who's obviously not a scholar, who's buying this very scholarly siddur. Sidur's buying a nice siddur with big letters and nice binding. She said, why do you want a siddur with so much extra text all around and little prayers in the middle? She said, because over the years I pray a lot, and my pages, they get torn. When the pages get torn, I start losing words. I can't use a book. But I have all the commentary around, so even if the pages get torn and bent and creased, the middle will still be fine. The text in the middle doesn't get ripped, so I want the commentary by protection in the middle. So the rabbi built a fence around the Torah. They added extra layers of protection so that the core remains true, remains whole, remains integral. So the rabbis are building a fence. And what are the Sadducees saying? Who are you to build fences around God's word? Now, by the way, these three things are exactly the three stages of the oral Torah that we discussed. The Baal Dorshe HaChalakot, they're interpreting, they're making things smooth. That's the traditions, how to put on tefillin. They're trying to make it easy how to put on tefillin. They're giving you their own oral interpretations, the tradition how to do it. The Talmud Shikkum, the second area of oral law is what? What was the second kind of oral law? Interpretation, the derived oral law. And they're writing in a very, negative, sarcastic way. But Talmud Shikkum, that their interpretation, their derivations of oral law are false. What was the third kind of oral law? The legislation. The fence around the Torah. And they're saying that this fence, you build to the wall, you're going to be destroyed. It's referring to the prophet of Yirmiyahu that's describing those that said that the wall is safe, when really the walls of Jerusalem were not safe, they'll be destroyed, etc. The point is, what's the problem here? What's the debate? The debate is on the very core fundamental structure of Jewish law, which is all of Judaism. Are you going to allow for human interpretation? Are you going to require Judaism to be a synergy of God's Torah and human comprehension? Or do you accept only God's Torah and no human intervention at all? That's the debate. And that's not a debate about pouring water. That debate is not about this. That debate is about the fundamental, how do you decide what it means to be a Jew? How do you decide? Big debate.
You go by the majority.
There's a question you can ask. And that's the debate. There's one problem.
Only one?
Well, there's one big problem. And if you have the Judaism Dakota course, you know that this problem exists. And without getting into too much detail, it is impossible to be a Jew, follow the Bible, or to follow anything. It's impossible to follow the Constitution of America without interpretation. It's impossible. You cannot follow a written text without someone explaining to you how you interpret it, how you read it, how you understand what the words mean. The Constitution needs interpretation.
And realize the problem.
The people that were living in the Dead Sea, the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, also had interpretations. They had tefillin in their caps. Now, how do they know what the tefillin was? Doesn't say in the Bible what should be in the tefillin. So someone had to interpret for the people, the Sadducees. Uh-oh.
I had to get it from somewhere other than...
We'll hopefully get to 10 minutes. What?
I had to get it from somewhere other than the written law, because it's not in there.
Yeah, so where did they get it from? Where did they get it from? Let's do this.
You need to plug in?
No, hold the last. I just lowered it. They also have interpretation, right? If you have a mezuzah scroll, what does the Torah say about a mezuzah?
You shall put it upon...
You shall write them on the gates of your doorposts. It doesn't say what you should write. Now they have mezuzahs that had only one paragraph, or two paragraphs, Shema and Vayim Shema. So they also had an interpretation. So how did their interpretation work? So let me introduce you to another concept that existed in the Dead Sea Scrolls, called the Moired Tzedek, the righteous teacher, the righteous interpreter. Text number 15. Steve, you want to read it?
They are the speaker of lies and the seers of falsehood. They planned evil against me to replace your Torah, that you taught in my heart with falsehood to your people.
The author of this is the Moired Tzedek, the Moired Tzedek, the righteous teacher, or the teacher of righteousness, who claimed to have the right to divine interpretation. They also had interpretation. They also had a tradition about the tefillin, but it came from above them, it came from on high. It wasn't derived, it wasn't extrapolated. It was a tradition that was from their leader. So the tefillin also, they had tradition from their teachers. But their point was that the traditions came, the interpretations came not through the human comprehension, but it came from divine revelation. Okay? Traditional Judaism absolutely, categorically says that law is not meant to be from divine inspiration. Not just that we don't rely on it, not just that we also allow for human interpretation. Jewish law says that if it's not human interpretation, it's not Jewish law. To the extent, look in text number 16. Let me read over here. Beth, you want to read text number 16?
3,000 laws were forgotten during the mourning period for Moses. The Jews asked Joshua, "Inquire of God." He responded, "It is not in heaven." They said to Samuel, "Inquire of God." He responded, "These are the commandments." Meaning from here on, no prophet can introduce anything novel.
Meaning, when the Jews were mourning the loss of their beloved teacher Moshe for 30 days, they got a little distracted with the trauma of losing their teacher. After the mourning was over, they had a question. There were laws they had forgotten. So they come to the new rabbi, to Joshua, and say, "Joshua, go up to heaven, go ask God." Moshe did it all the time. We had a question of Moshe. He said, "1 second, guys, I'll give you a minute." God, right? That's how Moshe operated. And what does Joshua say?
Joshua says,
Not in heaven.
It's not in heaven. There's a verse in the Torah that says, "Torah lo b'shamayim." Torah is not in the heavens.
Torah lo
It's not on the other side of the ocean. It's very close. Torah is not in the heavens. Sorry, guys, I can't help you. You got to figure it out on your own. He's not talking about a new law that they never had before. He's talking about a law that had already been given by God to Moshe, to the Jewish people, and they had forgotten it.
But shouldn't Joshua know it?
Joshua forgot it too. He forgot it. You ever heard someone forgetting? Point is, maybe he figured it out. Maybe they interpreted it. Maybe they tried to figure it out. The point is,
it needed interpretation.
he says, "I'm not asking God. Torah is not in the heavens. We were taught it. We forgot. We're going to have to figure it out together." By the way, the same thing happened years later with Shmuel Hanavi, Samuel the prophet. There were also laws that were forgotten, and they came to him and they asked Samuel, "Go up to heaven to find some laws." This is the exact same thing. Can't help you, my friends. Meaning, in traditional Judaism, in the rabbinic interpretation, anyone that comes to you and says, "I had a vision, I saw God, and He told me whatever," out, out. You say, "I had an idea, I figured it out." Let's see what you figured out. Guy walks into the yeshiva in the Talmud and says, "Guys, I had a dream. I had a vision of God spoke to me. I had an epiphany. I'm a prophet." Prophets were never ever teachers. Jews had prophets to inspire us, to exhort us, to rebuke us, to lead us, to teach us law. Never. A rabbi and a prophet, they weren't the two people. Never the two people. Right? Different jobs. Prophet can give you inspiration. Law that must come from the human mind.
Amazing.
And this brings us to the core fundamental debate between the Sadducees and the Perushim regarding their debate. Which this debate, and how the Rebbe explains it, is as follows. I'm going to give you another example. About the Moritz Tzedek. They had this teacher of righteousness. And this is the core of the debate. The Dead Sea said, "We need interpretation. Let's get it from heaven. Let's call the Moritz Tzedek, and he'll give us some vision from heaven." Right? And what do the rabbis say? The rabbis say, you got to figure it out your own. So I'm going to ask you a question before I give you this. What's the advantages, on page 17, what's the advantages of a system that relies on prophecy? You want to give some ideas? Laura, you want it? Any ideas? What's the advantage of relying on prophecy?
You don't have to interpret, you don't have to think.
It's a literal translation. It's whatever is said, that is what it is.
Okay. You don't have to think, it is what it is. Take it or leave it, that's what it is. Anything else? What's an advantage of the other way, of a human-based legal system?
You have to work it out.
You don't have to wait for divine revelation in order to...
So you don't have to wait?
Yeah, you have to work it out.
You can also look at the situation as it stands.
Also, how do you know what's a false prophet and what's a real prophet? It's human beings trying...
That's one very big problem, that you have many imposters in the course of history that have had divine relations, either because they were smoking something, or because of whatever, or because they were just good liars.
Paid well, yeah.
When the Torah was revealed, it was revealed to the entire people. It wasn't, one person wasn't the repository of God's revelation. It can be very dangerous to do.
Yeah, but the oral Torah was of one person only, and that was Moshe.
The key is what Mindy said before. The Torah was never meant to be kept by one or two people, and you had to come to them for the laws. The Torah was meant in order to survive throughout the future of history, in so many different countries, in so many different environments, in so many different needs. There had to be a structure in place where God deliberately wrote the Torah sometimes in an ambiguous way. God could have written clearly what you should put in the tefillin. He didn't pay per word, right? He could have added a few more lines. But God wanted, He knew that the only way that we can have a structure that will survive history is if it's a structure that requires our involvement.
Well, isn't that the way God gave the oral Torah to Moshe to pass on the whole concept
Right.
of it?
So the Rabbi explained something very beautiful. I'm going to go back to this.
Well,
I'll say one thing. I'll take questions. Before my computer dies, I'll take questions. If you remember, we said before I was going to go get the plug. It's plugged in the office. I think we'll be fine. I have one last slide, I think. A few last slides. What did we say before about the debate about the calendar? And this idea encapsulates the whole debate. When did the holiday of Shavuos begin according to the rabbis?
15th of Nisan.
Whatever day of the week we harvested the Omer, right?
Yeah, not
And the Sadducees say, when is the day of Shavuos, the day of giving the Torah, what day is it? After Shabbat. What's the difference? What's the difference between Shabbat and the regular day of Pesach, regular day of whatever, work? Shabbat is what?
a holy day, a rest day.
The seventh day.
What makes Shabbat Shabbat?
It's the 7th.
It's God decided it's holy.
Yeah.
No human being makes Shabbat holy. No human being says, I hereby consecrate today to be a day of rest. Who decided what day would be Pesach? Who decided was the 15th day of the month? Well, the 15th day of the month is based on the first day of the month. Who decided the first day of the month?
Susan did?
What? When is Rosh Chodesh? When's the first day of the month in the times of the temple?
The new moon.
When the court would decide the new moon, witnesses would come to the court and say, we saw the new moon, right? In the times of the temple, there was no fixed calendar like we have today. You didn't go to the synagogue before Rosh Hashanah to get your calendar for the year, stick it to your fridge, and check 6 months in advance, and plan tell your woman you're going on vacation because you have Pesach. Every month, the courts would have to listen to the testimony of witnesses to establish what day is Pesach, what day is the first day of the month. So Pesach is on the 15th day of the month because I think he died. Because someone goes off, plug on the wall.
What?
My plug. Steve is getting it.
Okay.
He's getting it. What day is Pesach? When the rabbis decided it's the first day of the month. 15 days later is Pesach. So the whole concept of Shabbat and Pesach are two very different things. One is holy because God made it holy. He said it today's Saturday. And one's holy because man made it holy. So when the Torah says that you should start counting the Omer on the day after Shabbat, what does that mean?
Sunday.
It's God's
Thank you.
decision.
What?
It's God's decision.
No, well, it depends how you view what do you call Shabbat? If you're a rabbi that says that human interpretation is critical, so when does Shabbat begin? So if you're a rabbi that says that human interpretation is critical, so when do you start counting the Omer? The day after Passover. If, however, if, however, you believe that everything is from divine inspiration, so when do you start counting the Omer? The day after Shabbat. You lost me. We're getting distracted.
Okay, yeah, I'm distracted.
Sorry. It's okay. It's not your fault.
It's
Your fault. Thank you. Sorry, no, we lost that. One second. Okay, let me review. The difference between Shabbat and Passover is Shabbat is holy. Why? God said it's holy. Pesach is the 15th day of the month is holy. Why? Because the human court decided today's the 15th. They could have said today's the 14th. And then today will be a regular work, then tomorrow will be holy.
Yeah.
Right? So, the rabbis say that what's the basis of Torah? What's the basis of Torah? There we go. Okay, here. According to the Sadducees, they'll do it the other way around. Shabbat precedes the giving of the Torah. Why? Because what's the basis of the Torah?
God's word.
Divine inspiration, top-down approach, right? So when do you start preparing for Shavuos? On the day after Sunday, on the day after Shabbat, on Sunday.
That's the top, okay, the top down.
If you're a rabbi that says that what's the main element of the Torah is a human interpretation, so when do you start counting, preparing for Shavuos, for the day when we receive the Torah?
After Pesach.
The day after we establish the day to be holy. Understand the difference?
Yeah.
This one debate encapsulates the entire debate between the rabbis and the Prussian. The Sadducees. The Sadducees said, we are not capable of making decisions how to be a Jew. It's all from divine inspiration. The rabbis said, not just that we're capable, the only way Judaism can survive, the only way it will thrive, is if we are active partners in creating Judaism.
So if we're not
within a structure framework that God gave us. Within an acceptance of the divinity of the Torah. Obviously, if you start denying the divinity of Torah, then you're not entitled or authorized to start changing how the Torah should be if you don't accept the foundation. But if you accept that it's all divine, if you accept every word of the Bible is holy, and you accept the structure of derivation that God gave us, then Torah is meant for you to interpret it, for you to personalize it, for you to find the parts that inspire you, and to make it real to you from how you understand it.
Food for thought or devil's advocate here. The traditional Judaism that won out, you could argue is not what we have today, because if you're saying that human involvement is involved, that part of Judaism is legislative, today maybe the result that the 90% of American Jewry is conservative and reformist because they want to be involved and they're applying it to today's times, just like the rabbis felt at the Sanhedrin, let's make these laws for the defense of the Torah because it's right for these times. We don't have that advantage today.
Okay, so excellent, very good question. So, and I don't get to, I already kind of preempted it by saying you have to accept the divinity of Torah. That's first of all. If you don't have the foundation of the written Torah, is every word is divine from God, then you're on a different boat. You're not in the same boat. You got to accept the Torah as the word of God. That's first of all. Second of all, is that in theory you're right. Theoretically, we could say the Sanhedrin made a decree, whatever their decree is. We today, the rabbis, feel we're living in different times, should be different. There's a technical problem. Since the decree was made by rabbis, by a court of a certain stature and a certain number of rabbis, 71 rabbis of a certain level, today there's no court that matches that Sanhedrin. What would happen if we were to make a Sanhedrin today? Then theoretically we could change some of the laws that are legislative laws that are not from inside the Torah. Theoretically we could start eating chicken and milk together.
Or
Theoretically.
The holiday just appear on one day instead of
We could theoretically, exactly, if we were to have a Sanhedrin, theoretically we'd be able to say that we no longer need a 2-day holiday and 1-day holiday.
Right.
But we don't have a Sanhedrin. Why not? You come to lesson number 4 of this course. We're going to be discussing the debate between the rabbis in Yerushalayim and the rabbis in Tzfat. The rabbis in Tzfat wanted to make a new Sanhedrin in the 1500s, and the rabbis of Jerusalem were against making us a new Sanhedrin. And if you understand that debate, then maybe you can understand why there's no Sanhedrin today. But theoretically, if the rabbis of Tzfat would have prevailed over the rabbis of Jerusalem, and there would be a Sanhedrin today, then we could change it. Today should only be a 1-day holiday instead of 2-day holidays, theoretically. Lesson 4, you have to come back for lesson 4. I was waiting for someone to lead me.
Well, wait a second. A lot of our 2-day holidays are only 1 day in Israel.
That's right.
That's because they never had a 2-day holiday.
Except for Rosh Hashanah.
We're going off subject. Okay, the whole idea of the 2-day holiday is because in the diaspora they didn't know what day the court was establishing as the first day of the month. They never had a 2-day holiday, so they never continued it. We had, so we continued it. But I don't want to go on, off subject. Let me conclude. Let me finish with this. Text number 17 will be our conclusion. As I said before, the critical difference is if we accept human involvement, and therefore the only way for Judaism to survive is by our involvement, correct?
Otherwise, like Minty said, we're frozen.
Let's be 17. Let's just go to 17b. 17b, the last text. Who did Steve? You read?
The truth is that what people comprehend about the Torah with their own minds is also God's Torah. What we comprehend is a part of God's infinite wisdom that He made accessible to us in our finite world so that a human mind is able to comprehend it. and thereby the purpose of the giving of the Torah is realized, that there should be harmony between God and humankind. When we introduce Torah concepts using our own minds, God's Torah is attributed to us and becomes our Torah, our idea. This knowledge might be less than what we would have had if we had received everything from above. But on the other hand, this knowledge is ours, and engaging in this process links us to God in a very intimate way. Thus, counting the 49 days is the proper preparation for the holiday of Shavuot.
This is God giving us His mind, giving us the ability to have a synergy with God, that we become one with Him. We become one with Him. The famous joke that Sadie takes her husband to the doctor, married already 50 years, and the doctor, the psychologist, there's an analysis, and he says to his wife, your husband is completely losing his mind. So I'm not surprised. For the last 50 years, he's been giving me a piece of his mind every day. God's giving us a piece of His mind. And here's what I wanted to finish off with this. Text number 18. From the Rebbe, a beautiful point. As I said before, as Mindy said correctly, if the Sadducees would have prevailed over the Pharisees, if the Torah we would have today would be limited to the divine revelation, Torah would have remained frozen in a certain time, with individuals claiming to have divine authority to tell us what to do. Would Judaism have survived? No. Text number 18. Carol, under text number 18.
If one wishes to know the secret of Jewish survival under circumstances which have obliterated larger and stronger nations, it's necessary to find the common factor or factors. In all various periods of Jewish history, which would then have to be taken on the basis of Jewish survival, this factor was not language, nor country, nor anything else, which is often associated with nationhood and nationalism. For in all these things there have been radical changes from one period to another, as anybody familiar with Jewish history knows. The single factor which has preserved our Jewish people throughout the ages under all kinds of circumstances has been the fulfillment of the mitzvot in day-to-day life, such as the observance of Shabbat, the putting on of tefillin, and the Torah education of our children. There have always been deviations. The Torah itself relates that immediately after the Torah was given at Sinai, there were the golden calf worshippers. Similarly, throughout the period of the judges, prophets, and kings, as well in the post-biblical period of the second Beit HaMikdash, and later, these deviationists attempted to steer another course away from traditional Judaism, but they could never take root within the Jewish people. Either these deviationists eventually realized their mistake and returned to the fold of observance of Torah and mitzvot, or they were completely assimilated among the nations of the world.
Beautiful. Have you ever met a Jewish pagan who's a continuation of the Jewish idol worshippers of the first temple?
No.
Never happened. They don't exist anymore. And you're not going to find any Sadducees anymore from the second temple. You're not going to find any of the Essenes. You're not going to find any of these Dead Sea sects. You won't find any of the original Jewish Christians. You won't find any Karaites. Although you have one shul in San Francisco, one shul in the entire Americas, one shul in Israel. By the way, so on the forum, a rabbi wrote that he saw them, that he knows when they went there, and what did they serve on Shabbos? Cholent. Cholent is a food that was made by religious Jews to show that we eat hot food on Shabbos against the Karaites. You don't find the followers of Shabtai Tzvi. You don't find the followers of the Frankisten who should follow the Frank. You don't follow the Yevestietzia, which are the Jewish communists. You don't find any of them anymore. Why? Because the immortality of the Jews, is embedded in a holistic approach to Torah, which combines accepting the divinity of the written Torah and the need for us to work, to dig, to toil, to understand it. And I end with a story of a famous analogy that Rabbi Akiva was teaching Torah. And the Romans came, and the Romans had outlawed the teaching of Torah. This is right after the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls. During the destruction of the temple, the Romans would kill anyone who was caught teaching Torah. Rabbi Akiva lived right after the Dead Sea Scrolls were done. He lived in this time of the destruction of the temple. And one day one of his friends saw him teaching Torah and said, Rabbi Akiva, aren't you worried you're going to be killed? The Romans catch you, they'll kill you. Which eventually is what happened to him. They caught him, they tortured him to death.
Yeah.
Rabbi Akiva answered with a beautiful analogy, and he said that there was once a fox that came to the river. And the fox saw the fish were swimming to and fro, back and forth. So he asks the fish, where are you going? So the downstream is a fisherman who's trying to catch us. So the fox says, I have a good idea. Come onto my back. I'll take you to my cave where it's safe. There's no fishermen where I live, and you'll be safe from the fishermen. And the fish says, they say the fox is a smart animal, but you're the foolishest of them all. In the water, maybe the fisherman will catch me, maybe he won't. I have a chance. If I leave the water and go with you, I'm dead. I'll become a sushi platter. Yeah. That's what will become of me. I'll be your lunch. So Rabbi Akiva said to his friend, Torah is our life, Torah is our water. If I'm teaching Torah, maybe they'll kill me, maybe they won't. But I have a chance to survive. If we give up on the Torah, we will cease to exist guaranteed. The Jews that are alive today is because the Rabbi said we have a synergy between God gave us and what we interpret, and that's what kept Torah going for thousands of years.
Amazing.
God willing, next week will be another very, very critical debate of Jewish history. If you're not signed up, please join us. The debate between those Jews that wanted to fight for political independence, encapsulated by the Jews that died in Masada, but not limited to them, obviously, versus the rabbis that were willing to submit to the Romans to give up on a national identity in order to maintain a religious identity. Next week, same time, same place. Thank you very much.
Very good.